Hey, everybody. It is Wednesday, October 15th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I am Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. And sometimes we get called to jury duty.
And that would have been me yesterday, Moshe. They wanted me for a case that would have run for 6 to 8 weeks. So I thought I couldn't do that to you. so you're stuck with me, Moshe. Is that what you told them?
You're like, listen, I work for Moshe. It's going to be a problem. And they said, we understand. Is that the excuse you used?
Actually, one of the questions that they ask on the questionnaire is, do you work for a company that has fewer than 10 employees? Which I do. And so I think that they do realize that it is not so easy to take 8 weeks off. Not to mention, I have 2 young kids and I'm pretty much their chauffeur during the week.
And so they showed you the exit. They said, okay, Jill Wagner, we're good.
That's right. But I find the whole process to be really interesting.
So interestingly, Jill, for the first time ever on Monday, I've been called to a federal grand jury, not jury duty. I have been called to jury duty before. I've never served. Either they had filled a jury or I, said I was a journalist and they decided I have biases one way or another. But federal grand jury, which, Jill, that could put me out of commission for months. So curious how this will go. Any of you who have ever been called to federal grand jury, feel free to send me a direct message with insights.
You're going to come back and it's going to be Jill news, as we joke.
Yeah, I'll be like, Jill, I've been gone for 6 months. What's been happening? Because I've been a federal grand jury. Now, some of these more interesting than others, right? I could be on a grand jury that is dealing with something we cover. But ultimately, that might be a reason why they don't want me to serve on the grand jury. I don't know. We'll see. I'll keep you guys up to date. By the way, I should note on this October 15th, if you filed for an income tax return extension back in April, well, today's your deadline, October 15th. So you need to get the paper in today, or I should say your returns in today.
As hundreds of IRS workers furloughed.
Yeah, you're probably not going to get your refund for a while, but you still need to meet the deadline because it turns out that the government not being able to do its job doesn't mean that you can't meet their deadline. That's probably what they'll tell you when they get back to work, Jill.
Okay, the headlines now. President Trump honors the late Charlie Kirk at the White House as Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro speaks out about the man charged with trying to kill him.
Yeah, interesting comments from Shapiro on the impact he sees on people trying to run for office, Jill, as we're getting new numbers, concerning numbers, about the number of Americans who say political violence might be necessary.
In tech news, what Instagram's doing to try to keep teens safe on its platform.
Yes, the latest announcement here, Jill, a story we've been covering for a while.
To the Middle East, perhaps the first snag in the ceasefire between Hamas and Israel.
It's probably safe to say that it's the first and definitely not the last, Jill.
Well, as President Trump said to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, stop being so effing negative, Moshe.
That's the thing. Ultimately, if you let all these bumps on the road stop you, well, that is what has stopped folks in the past.
Government shutdown day 15. The White House warns more layoffs are coming. In health news, the FDA approves a blood test to help rule out Alzheimer's disease in people who are showing symptoms. To the economy, America's gender pay gap is going in the wrong direction. We'll tell you why. And why one newspaper is bringing back its print edition.
Records are back. Cassette tapes are back. Print newspapers are back, Jill. The 90s called.
It wants its media. And Moshe's on this day in history.
Jill, I think I'll sum up today's On This Day in History by telling you it's pretty good.
Okay, starting with some news from the White House. President Trump awarding conservative activist Charlie Kirk the Presidential Medal of Freedom Tuesday on what would have been his 32nd birthday. Kirk was assassinated September 10th while attending a Turning Point USA event at Utah Valley University's campus. The Presidential Medal of Freedom is awarded to individuals whom presidents determine have made exceptional contributions to the country. Trump called him a, quote, martyr for truth and for freedom. Here is his widow, Erica Kirk, accepting the honor.
Honestly, President Trump, I have spent 7.5 years trying to find the perfect birthday gift for Charlie. And it's so difficult. And those of you that have spouses or loved ones, you know how difficult it is sometimes to buy a gift for someone that you love, because he wasn't a materialistic man, so that also did not help. But now I can say with confidence, Mr. President, that you have given him the best birthday gift he could ever have.
She said Kirk's life and final moments embodied one word: freedom, which was on his T-shirt the day that he was assassinated last month in Utah. And she also said that if the moment had come, he probably would have run for president.
Yeah, a lot of people say that. He was so young. Again, yesterday would have marked his just 32nd birthday. It does come as we continue to see this increase in political violence in the country, Jill, in the last couple of years. And it appears, based on some new polling out after Kirk's death, that about 1 in 3 Americans think political violence might be necessary. Some concerning numbers here. 3 in 10 Americans now say that Americans may have to resort to violence to get the country back on track. This is an NPR PBS Marist poll. They asked respondents, do you agree with the following statement? Americans may have to resort to violence in order to get the country back on track. Now, 70%, 7 out of 10 Americans say, no, I disagree with that statement. But 30% say violence might be necessary to, again, the phrase is, get the country back on track. That is up 11 points since April of 2024. And the increase here driven by Democrats. Just 18 months ago, only 12% of Democrats agreed with that statement. Now 28% of Democrats do. A slightly higher percentage of Republicans do. 31% of Republicans agree with the statement that Americans may have to resort to violence to get the country back on track. That's also up 3 points over last year. Independents now at 25%. So 28% of Democrats, 31% of Republicans, 25% of independents. Concerning numbers, Jill, as of course there was assassination of Charlie Kirk. And in recent weeks, just if you've been listening to this podcast, we told you about the sentencing of the person who tried to kill Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. We told you about the sentencing of that second man who tried to kill President Trump last summer. And yesterday, we saw a resolution in regards to the plot to kill the governor of Pennsylvania. This was another attempted assassination. We saw the sentencing of the man who firebombed the governor's mansion during the Jewish holiday of Passover. He pleaded guilty to attempted murder and terrorism, was sentenced to between 25 and 50 years in prison. Prosecutors saying that the 38-year-old man, Cody Balmer, scaled the fence of the governor's mansion, broke in, threw Molotov cocktails that caused millions of dollars of damage, while Shapiro, who is Jewish, and his family slept inside. He firebombed the room where they were holding their Passover Seder, the meal that is held for the holiday. Thankfully, no one was injured. And notably, Balmer called 911 himself about an hour after the attack, admitting to setting the fire in the governor's mansion. He said he didn't approve of Shapiro's views on the war in Gaza. He told police that he had actually planned to kill the governor with a sledgehammer if he had seen the governor. He actually tried to, make it further into the home before he stopped. Now, the Pennsylvania governor, Shapiro, delivering pretty emotional remarks about the sentencing yesterday. Here's a bit of it.
It's hard for me to stand before you today and utter the words attempted murder when it's your own life, to know that someone tried to kill me. It's especially hard to know that he tried to burn our family to death while we slept.
Shapiro also reflected on his family's fear and the, quote, unacceptable level of political violence across the country. He said that he has had conversations with many people, good people, who he said simply do not want to run for office because they are nervous that their family could be hurt. And Moshe, that is a real problem because, needless to say, we could use some really good people running for public office.
Yeah, the people who are currently in office, a number of them not getting the job done, right? So you want some good outsiders, talented outsiders. But between just the chaos in Washington, the lack of anything really, real being done, we've been talking about the shutdown here, among the many other issues, and now political violence, the fear that you could be out there campaigning and someone could take a shot at you over an opinion that they disagree with, is leading a lot of folks to say, you know what, not for me.
Okay, now to some tech news that will be especially relevant to parents and teens listening to this podcast. Instagram is making a major content change for young people. So it was about a year ago that Instagram made some really big changes to the account settings for its teen users. And it came after there was a lot of concern and scrutiny from parents, also from members of Congress, over child safety issues. And yesterday, Instagram took those safety measures a bit further, saying that it would start to limit the content its teen users could see and base it on the PG-13 rating system. And that's probably familiar because that's the same type of rating system that the film industry uses. The policy will roll out by the end of this year. Here is Instagram head Adam Mosseri talking about the changes on the Today Show Tuesday.
I mean, I've got 3 kids. I know parents are busy, which is why it's so important that the defaults are safe. So all teens get teen accounts by default, which also means that they only interact with largely PG-13 type content by default. But if a parent has the time, and we're trying to raise awareness around these tools, they can set up parental supervision and they can shape the experience into what's best for their specific teen.
He admits this is not a perfect system, but he says Instagram does it better than a lot of social media platforms and other outlets out there. That PG-13 change will also apply to conversations with the company's AI chatbots. Lawmakers have been investigating them for having inappropriate sexual chats with children.
As for what constitutes PG-13, PG-13 movies are generally allowed to have some mild violence, partial nudity, although Meta said it would not recommend content with nudity to teen users. And also the PG-13 rule is one swear word, like one F-bomb. Once you get more than one F-bomb, that then takes things to rated R. So Instagram has hundreds of millions of teenage users, and the changes are the most significant update to teen content moderation since last year's policy overhaul. They've been rolling out more and more here over the course of the past couple of years. Mo News has been invited to a couple of these events at Meta, including a couple of weeks ago when Adam Mosseri and some Meta executives talked about the new level of protections they're trying to bring not only to Instagram, but the other Meta platforms, talking WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, as well as the main Facebook platform. But given just the number of young people who use Instagram, how popular Instagram is, we're talking about 3 billion people globally, again, hundreds of millions of teenage users, they are continuing to be under the gun here to do more to protect young people. The complaint from a lot of parents is the platform is complicated. I can't navigate it. I can't monitor it. Instagram, Meta, you need to do more here. And so you do see these companies taking more and more responsibility for safety for the things they can be doing for the users under the age of 18. Last year's safety changes limited what material teenagers could be shown in their feeds. The changes announced this week will make it harder for teenagers to actively seek out adult content. So one was one way coming to them. Now it's more about what they're seeking out. Now, they are trying to find ways to prevent kids and young people from getting around these various limits. Jill, they've talked extensively about using AI here to get a sense of your age, even if you try to lie about your age, based on who you follow and the content that you take in. They think that AI is getting better at predicting your age. And by the way, that goes for the other way, for adults pretending to be kids in order, to try to contact them. Again, based on who you follow and what you do, they think AI is able to help them to, again, detect people who are trying to get around the system here. And back to the PG-13 content here for a second. One of the things Instagram is doing to try to figure out what's appropriate here is that they've actually created panels with thousands of parents to rate material on the app and determine what they believe is appropriate.
This all comes as a lot of other countries, as we've talked about on this podcast, Moshe, are just straight up banning social media or trying to ban social media for teens. So Denmark, we reported last week, announced that it wants to ban social media for anyone under 15. Australia has a social media ban for anyone under 16. That is set to take effect in December. And in the US, there are some states like Utah and Florida that have tried to ban or restrict social media access for minors. The courts so far have blocked it, but I don't think this is going away.
No, it's really not going away. And the feeling from parents, from schools, from a number of local leaders, state leaders, national leaders, right, as you lay out some of those countries, is that they believe that they've waited long enough, or too long, in this case, for the tech companies to put some real protections in place. So they're taking things into their own hands.
Okay, time for the speed read, starting again in the Middle East from Axios, where the first potential crisis of the ceasefire deal has emerged over the bodies of the remaining Israeli hostages in Gaza. President Trump wrote on Truth Social Tuesday that phase 2 of the ceasefire deal begins, quote, right now. He says the 20 living hostages released by Hamas on Monday are feeling as good as can be expected, but that the job is not done. He wrote on social media in all caps, The dead have not been returned as promised. He is referring to the bodies of dead Israeli hostages still in Gaza. Only 4 were returned on Monday. Another 4 were returned on Tuesday. As of the signing of the ceasefire deal, there were 28 believed to still be in Hamas hands. As of today, if all 8 bodies returned turn out to be hostages, that would leave 20 bodies in Gaza. International officials in Israel now are accusing Hamas of violating the terms of the ceasefire agreement. The deal states that all hostages, dead or alive, were supposed to be returned by Monday. Hamas is claiming that it's having trouble finding all of the bodies in the rubble, but Israeli media is reporting that Israel conveyed a message to mediators saying that Israel knows exactly which bodies the group is holding or can access and is warning the terror group not to play games. Hamas officials also now realize that Israel knows more than they thought that they knew about the number and locations of the bodies that Hamas is holding. On Tuesday, Israel decided not to reopen the Rafah border crossing between the Gaza Strip and Egypt as required by the ceasefire deal. That is a response, they say, to Hamas failing to stand by its commitment to return the bodies. Israel said it would also reduce the amount of aid flowing into Gaza as part of the sanctions against the terror group.
So none of this is a surprise here. We've seen these issues in previous ceasefire deals, but of course, this time around, it's considered a permanent peace deal. And of course, we reported on and told you about President Trump traveling to the region and saying effectively, this time is different. Now, part of this has to do with the fact that Hamas sort of resents the deal. They got pressured into the deal. They believe that the deal is unfair, and they realize that one of the few leverage points they have left is these bodies, right? They've now returned all the living hostages, and they're holding on to these, maybe because they want more over time, maybe because they want to continue kind of psychological warfare against the Israelis who were celebrating the streets yesterday that the war was over and the hostages are back. And now it's, a reminder that no, they're not all back. And so Hamas has very few leverage points at this point. And one of the few things they do have are these Israeli bodies. And for Israel as a country, it has made a priority repatriating all remains for every Israeli ever. In fact, Jill, there's a conversation happening with Syria right now to try to get back a famous Mossad agent in Eli Cohen, who has been there since the 1960s. The Syrian regime for decades not returning his body, and the Israelis are negotiating to get that body back. So this has always been very much a priority for Israel. Hamas knows that. That is why Israel is willing to return hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of living Palestinian prisoners in exchange even for the dead remains here. Now, as for the Israeli response here, saying we're now not going to do certain things, including not let certain aid in, due to what Hamas is doing, they are receiving warnings from others to basically just continue here and we'll deal with Hamas. And you did hear the tone of President Trump yesterday. He was asked about this and other claims by Hamas, including Hamas saying publicly that they don't think they'll disarm. Trump minced no words yesterday when asked about this at the White House, saying, how long will it take for Hamas to disarm? What will you do if Hamas doesn't disarm? Here's a bit of what he had to say about that.
How long will it take Hamas to disarm, and can you guarantee that is going to happen?
Well, they're going to disarm, and because they said they were going to disarm. And if they don't disarm, we will disarm them.
How will you do that?
I don't have to explain that to you. But if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. They know I'm not playing games.
Again, Trump using the expression there, I'm not playing any games. And he said that he'll even resort to violence to get the arms out of Hamas's hands. This has been a big issue for Hamas as part of the Trump 20-point plan. There was the hostage exchange. Now we get to the even more difficult part, which is the disarmament of Hamas, which has been a terrorist group since the 1980s. And weapons are core to what they do. Their violent resistance against Israel. Now, Trump says he's set a reasonable period of time for Hamas to disarm. And it comes as Hamas says, we'll give up heavy weapons like missiles, but don't take away our guns. So that's going to be negotiated here. In the meantime, there is no one else but Hamas right now to continue to police Gaza. Trump acknowledging in the last couple of days, we'll let them temporarily police Gaza, but they will have to disarm at some point. And we have seen video and pictures in recent days, Jill, of Hamas forces attacking local Gaza clans, killing a number of individuals in the streets, execution style, who they accuse of working with Israel, working with the West, coming up against Hamas. And we've seen some, really concerning scenes coming out of Gaza. Again, Trump asked about this yesterday, saying, they're taking care of some bad people there, and that's just sort of the way things are. But ultimately, we will replace Hamas over time. once they give up their weapons. But there is no replacement force or replacement government ready to go. There have been negotiations in Egypt. They've picked what they call a committee of technocrats, Palestinian technocrats, that will now lead Gaza moving forward. And so look for an announcement about them, who they are, and how effectively they might manage things moving forward here in the coming days.
Okay, now to the latest on the government shutdown from Politico. The shutdown is in its 15th day, and there's still no resolution in sight. More federal workers could soon be shown the exits after the White House's budget office threatened another wave of continued layoffs. The Office of Management and Budget Account on X wrote on Tuesday, quote, OMB is making every preparation to batten down the hatches and ride out the Democrats' intransigence, pay the troops, pay law enforcement, continue the rifts, and wait. The warning comes after Trump's promise of around 4,000 cuts across 7 government agencies, with layoffs kicking off Friday and over the holiday weekend. Among them were mass layoffs at the IRS and the CDC. Officials say they think that more than 1,000 CDC staffers were laid off over the weekend. About half were later rehired because they held important roles. One person who was on a call getting details about the layoffs says after all the cuts this year, about a quarter of the CDC is gone.
Jill, it was interesting. I got a note from somebody who's familiar with some of those layoffs at CDC who's saying they purposefully laid off these people and then rehired them partially as just an attempt to make life difficult for them. You know, remember, it's considered a victory within the Trump administration to make government smaller. It's considered a victory for RFK Jr. To continue to make the CDC smaller. He has a problem with a number of people within the CDC based on his views of disease and what the CDC should be doing versus what the CDC has been doing. Now, at the same time, you hear people from across the public health world who are saying this gutting of the CDC and, you know, the firing and then the rehiring and then the firing of other divisions within CDC are putting the U.S. in a bad position. The CDC, considered the gold standard when it comes to disease surveillance and dealing with diseases globally. A lot of other countries look to the CDC for what it's doing when it comes to future pandemics, when it comes to dealing with current crises, when it comes to, even dealing with like food outbreaks across the country. The more people you fire around that might mean that, like, if you're getting sick, all these food recalls that happen, all these things, the CDC is involved in a lot of those things. And so whether it's diseases, research, foodborne illnesses, there's a lot of folks in the public health world who are very concerned about what is going on there, and that there are quality people who have a lot of experience being gutted. You're sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, even if the CDC is in need of reform. Again, this is something we're going to keep watching here. But going back to the shutdown for a second, right now there's no budging from either side. It looks like they're preparing for a long-term shutdown here, Jill. By long-term, I mean this could go for a number of weeks, break the record for longest shutdown. Right now, it's on the verge this week. If it continues through the end of the week, it'll be the third or even the second longest shutdown in American history. And then remember that longest in history was during the first Trump administration. That was 35 days. So that would take us into November if we go there. But so far, no budging. The big concern, of course, is the concern and what we saw last time, which is at some point the essential workers who continue to work with no pay right now. So we're talking, FBI agents and, even the aforementioned folks at the CDC and the TSA and the air traffic controllers. At some point, they're like, I'm not coming to work anymore. And Americans who don't work for the government will really start to feel it in the coming weeks.
Some health news from CNN. The FDA has given clearance to another blood test to help assess Alzheimer's disease and other causes of cognitive decline, providing a broader understanding of when the disease could be ruled out. Roche Diagnostics said this week that its p-tau 181 test, developed in collaboration with Eli Lilly, could be used by primary care physicians to help identify patients who are unlikely to have Alzheimer's disease. So those with a positive result would be recommended for further testing. This test is intended for people 55 and up in the United States who are showing signs or symptoms of cognitive decline. The CEO of Roche Diagnostics says that, quote, by bringing Alzheimer's blood-based biomarker testing into primary care, we can help patients and their clinicians get answers sooner to support them earlier in their journeys.
Yeah, it's important to distinguish here who has Alzheimer's and who doesn't, because, for example, if you test negative and you have, sort of an early sense of what is leading or not leading to your cognitive decline, that leads to a different treatment approach. Now, looking at overall numbers here, it's estimated that 2 in 5 people over the age of 55, so that's about 42%, will develop dementia in their later years, a form of it. About 92% of adults with mild cognitive impairment may go undiagnosed currently. So having these tests, again, give you an early heads up as to what may be explaining or not explaining a cognitive impairment here. And the new test will help reduce the reliance on PET scans, which is a type of brain imaging that can be pretty expensive. These, ideally, if they can be rolled out, can be much cheaper and easier to conduct. Definitely circle up with your doctors for details on all of this, but there's been a lot of developments in this part of the field. Now, unfortunately, we still don't have a cure for Alzheimer's. There are various treatments that are being investigated or being researched. But ultimately, it appears here, at least there's a breakthrough when it comes to at least ruling out the disease and getting an early sense of being able to identify people who might or might not have Alzheimer's.
And from the Mo News Substack, after decades of progress, the gender pay gap is widening again in the U.S. Census data shows that women earned less than 81 cents for every dollar that men made in 2024. That's down from 84 cents in 2022, marking the first consecutive 2-year decline since the 1960s. It's the biggest gender pay gap in the U.S. since 2016. So this is linked in part to women accepting pay cuts for more flexible work as more companies are bringing back in-person work requirements and the cost of childcare continues to climb. Full-time in-office requirements among Fortune 500 companies jumped to 24% in the early part of this year from 13% in the same period in 2024. President Trump ordered federal workers back to the office 5 days a week in January, and that included employees who had agreed to remote contracts.
So among the other reasons here for the widening pay gap again, the rising cost of childcare, which rose about 30% over the last 5 years, outpacing inflation over that time. You mentioned the rollback of remote work policies, which really helped bring a lot more women into the U.S. workforce, now driving many to leave. Labor force participation among women aged 25 to 54 fell nearly a percentage point over the last year, August to August. And earlier this year, the number of mothers in the workforce with children under the age of 5 reached its lowest point in more than 3 years. So definitely important to both look at the policies at a business level, but also at a government level. Jill, your regular reminder, and we definitely do this on the Instagram account, that the U.S. is one of less than 5 countries on earth that does not have federal mandatory maternity leave.
Okay, some media news now from Axios. The New York Sun, which just relaunched under its new owner and publisher in 2022, is reviving the paper's print edition for the first time since 2008. Print has seen a resurgence in magazines in recent years, although newspapers have rarely revived print editions in an era of declining circulation. But the new publisher says there's audience and advertiser demand for it. He says, quote, "We are not of the view that news consumption is reverting backwards, but we recognize that given the digital deluge, there is a growing demand to experience the consumption of newspapers differently in carve-outs in the lives of readers." So he says it's not like an everyday thing, but on weekends and in other more serene parts of our lives, people still want to sit on the porch or in a cafe, have a drink or a coffee, and read the paper. He says it is an experience that they are seeing heightened interest in and appreciation for.
Yeah, I feel like in an era of fake news, getting a newspaper to your door, you're like, okay, this is real. This was actually printed on paper and arrived at my door. It was a conversation I had recently with Nick Thompson, who's the president of Atlantic Monthly. You might remember Nick. He was the editor of Wired Magazine. I worked with him extensively at CBS, where he was a contributor for years. Now he's been running the Atlantic Monthly and been overseeing their great expansion. And he actually recently announced a move to go from 10 print editions a year to 12 print editions a year, seeing a revival of interest in getting magazines. Newspapers will be another story, Jill. I, for a number of years, made a point of getting like the Sunday New York Times print edition, and then it went unread. Like I was like, oh, it'd be so nice to wake up on Sunday morning, drink coffee, read the print edition of my newspaper. And that was like before I had a kid. So that's gone by the wayside. I just still have a digital subscription. But I do feel like there is something to that. We also had friend of the pod, Carlos Whitaker, on in recent months on the podcast. Maybe it was last year at this point. And he was talking about how as he figured out digital detox and tried to find ways to de-stress from the news while still being informed, he decided to very much limit his social media use and his online use and say, you know what I do, Moshe? I get the print newspaper thrown on my driveway every morning, open it up, get my news, and then sort of check out until the next morning. And I think there's probably something pretty healthy to that. Maybe we'll see a revival of this.
So my parents still get the print editions of a lot of newspapers delivered, and I go over there all the time. And it is a pleasure to pick up a print edition of a newspaper and just sit down on their kitchen table, have a little coffee, and read through stuff. And without fail, I find myself reading something that I probably would not have found based on the homepage online.
Well, that's the thing, right? Online, what you're getting, whether it's a newspaper website or it's social media, an algorithm has determined that like you, based on your previous clicks, will like this, or we're really trying to force this story down your throat, or we're giving you a headline that'll make you click, but it actually won't be substantive. Whereas like you leaf through a newspaper and you get to page A14, you're like, oh, I didn't know that. That's an interesting international story. That's an interesting business story. And again, you would not have seen it based on the way, the typical news website is laid out or your social media feed is aggregated these days. Now, speaking of historical things like print newspapers, we get to On This Day in History. On this day in 1952, Charlotte's Web was first published, the E.B. White book. That Jill, can you get through elementary school without reading Charlotte's Web?
These days, yes.
Why? Is it like on a banned list somewhere?
No, but like I never read that to my daughter, actually. But I guess she's only in second grade.
Jill, let's check in a couple of years. I imagine your daughter will have Charlotte's Web served to her sometime in the next 2 years. On this day in 1959, a final conference was convened on the Antarctic Treaty in D.C. The treaty was signed by 12 countries at the time who all agreed that Antarctica would not be sliced up by various countries, but would be preserved for the world and available for scientific study. A bit of music and pop culture history for all of you on this October 15th. On this day in 1973, 52 years ago today, country star Dolly Parton released her song Jolene, 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 Jolene. Oh, stop. Help everyone. Anyway, she says the inspiration for Jolene came from a young redheaded girl about 8 years old who asked Dolly Parton for an autograph. And Dolly recounted this in a NPR interview at one point. She said, well, you're the prettiest little thing I ever saw. What is your name? And the little girl said, Jolene. And I said, Jolene, 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 Jolene. I said, that is pretty. That sounds like a song. I'm going to write a song about your name. And that is how we got Jolene, Jill.
I wonder where that 8-year-old girl is now. That redheaded Jolene.
Yeah, so she would have been 8 in the early 70s, which would, put her in her, right around 60 years old today.
Jolene, if you're out there and you're listening to this podcast, we want to talk.
We're going to track down the OG Jolene. On this day in 1999, Fight Club was released 26 years ago today. Iconic line.
First rule of podcasts, don't talk about podcasts.
No, the first rule of podcasts is always talk about podcasts.
Yes, Moshe, everybody wants to talk about a podcast that they're starting, that they were on, that they're listening to. It is the opposite. You're right.
Yeah, Sarah Silverman did a sketch recently where she's like, 8 out of 10 Americans have a podcast. The other 2 are about to launch their podcast. And finally, if you didn't get the clue at the beginning, on this day 25 years ago, Larry David launches Curb Your Enthusiasm on HBO, premiering on October 15th, 2000.
Pretty good.
Yeah, a quarter century old on this day.
And it still holds. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, review us in the App Store.
And if you want to support my singing lessons, you can join Mo News Premium, mo.news/premium. I won't spend it on singing lessons. We spend it on Mo News. We reinvest in Mo News here, looking to expand Mo News. And you can support us. We're majority listener and subscriber supported here. Mo News Premium gives you access to weekend coverage, gives you access to our web app. So it allows you to do digital detox. You get all of our coverage off of Instagram. You also get our regular workshops. We have another one coming up in a couple of weeks. You also can access our exclusive Slack community where you can engage with thousands of other Mo News Premium users. Jill, a lot there for the Mo News Premium crowd. So definitely check it out. mo.news/premium, just $9 a month or $99 a year. And you get to start with a 30-day free trial. Again, mo.news/premium.
All right. Bye, everyone.
They can listen Muna kita apa.